Rudolph Valentino's mansion, Falcon Lair, is one of the most iconic haunted locations in Hollywood lore. Nestled in the Hollywood Hills, this luxurious estate was once home to the legendary silent film star. Valentino, renowned for his smoldering performances in films like The Sheik, tragically died at only 31 years old, leaving behind not just a grieving fan base but, allegedly, his restless spirit. According to the legend, Valentino's ghost has been spotted wandering through the mansion's grand hallways and private quarters, his presence as magnetic as it was in life. Witnesses claim to hear mysterious footsteps, feel cold drafts, and see inexplicable shadows moving across the walls. One of the eeriest parts of the story is the recurring sight of Valentino's ghost on horseback, galloping through the Hollywood area. Dressed in attire reminiscent of his The Sheik role, he's said to ride as though performing for an unseen audience. Some believe this ghostly apparition symbolizes his yearning to relive his glory days. Visitors and former staff at Falcon Lair have shared chilling accounts of strange occurrences. A housekeeper reported feeling someone brush past her in an empty room, only to turn and see Valentino's unmistakable silhouette disappearing through a closed door. On moonlit nights, some residents of nearby neighborhoods claim to hear the sound of hooves on the pavement, only to find no rider or horse in sight. A young couple once staying at the mansion's guest house swore they saw Valentino's face in a mirror late at night, his eyes filled with sorrow. Falcon Lair became a symbol of Valentino's unfulfilled dreams. He purchased the home as a haven, envisioning a life with his second wife, Natasha Rambova, but their marriage dissolved shortly after. Following his death, many claimed the mansion retained his emotional imprint, becoming a vessel for his spectral presence. The story of Rudolph Valentino's ghost is both eerie and poetic, capturing the mystique of Hollywood's golden age. His mansion, though remodeled and privately owned, remains a magnet for paranormal enthusiasts and history buffs alike, drawn to the legend of a star who shines even in death. The mansion itself seems to conspire with the legend, as if its walls whisper Valentino's untold secrets. Visitors have described strange smells burning incense or exotic spices, reminiscent of the sets from The Sheik, suddenly filling the air. Doors creak open by themselves, revealing darkened rooms that shouldn't exist on the mansion's blueprints. One peculiar incident involves a Hollywood historian who visited Falcon Lair in the late 1980s, seeking to document its haunted history. While taking photographs in Valentino's old study, she noticed something strange through the lens. An elegant figure seated at the desk, scribbling furiously. The figure lifted his head, revealing Valentino's unmistakable face, his eyes fixed on hers with a chilling intensity. Startled, she lowered her camera, but the room was empty. When she developed the film, that frame showed nothing but an empty chair. There's one particular room in Falcon Lair that seems to emanate an almost palpable sense of dread. Former residents called it the Blue Room, though no one knows why it's been repainted multiple times, and no traces of its original decor remain. Despite this, everyone who enters claims to feel an oppressive weight, as if someone or something is watching. A construction worker hired to restore the mansion in the early 2000s reportedly refused to enter the Blue Room after hearing faint music coming from inside. The melody, he later described, sounded like a hauntingly beautiful piano tune, growing louder the closer he got. When he opened the door, the room was silent and empty. One chilling tale involves a local journalist who decided to investigate reports of Valentino's spectral horseback rides. Hoping to capture the phenomenon, he staked out a quiet stretch of Mulholland Drive on a foggy night, camera at the ready. Hours passed without incident, but just as he was about to leave, the sound of hooves shattered the silence. Through the mist, he saw a figure emerge, a man on a sleek, black stallion, his form illuminated by the faint glow of the moon. The rider paused, turning his head to meet the journalist's gaze. For a brief moment, the face of Rudolph Valentino stared back at him, before horse and rider vanished into the fog as if they had never been there at all. Adding to the intrigue, a recent discovery within the mansion's attic raised more questions than answers. A small, ornate box was found hidden beneath the floorboards, containing what appeared to be an unfinished letter penned by Valentino himself. The letter speaks cryptically of shadows that move without form, and a debt owed to the stars. Before the letter's mysterious conclusion, Valentino's final words were scrawled in a hurried, almost frantic script. To the one who finds this, you must not let them. The rest of the sentence was never written. It wasn't until the late 1990s that Falcon Lair's true enigma deepened. A new owner, an eccentric art collector, decided to excavate parts of the property's basement to create a wine cellar. During the dig, workers unearthed an iron chest sealed with a peculiar lock that resembled Valentino's famous signet ring. The chest was moved into the center of the room, but before it could be opened, strange things began happening. One worker claimed his flashlight flickered out, leaving the group in complete darkness, save for a faint, bluish glow that appeared to emanate from the chest itself. Another worker swore he heard Valentino's voice, clear as day, whispering the words, "You've gone too far." The chest was never opened. The workers abandoned the site that very night, refusing to return. The collector, shaken but intrigued, sealed off the basement entirely, leaving the mysterious artifact entombed in the dark. One of the mansion's most unsettling events occurred during a private séance held by a group of Hollywood elites in the 1970s. The medium, known for her dramatic flair, claimed to have made contact with Valentino almost immediately. At first, the atmosphere was calm, the room lit by flickering candlelight, but as the medium began to describe Valentino's presence, the candles all extinguished at once. In the pitch-black darkness, guests reported feeling an icy chill sweep through the room, accompanied by the sound of soft, deliberate footsteps circling the table. A low voice, unmistakably male, whispered a single word, "Leave." Panic ensued, with several guests fleeing into the night. The medium herself collapsed into unconsciousness and awoke hours later with no memory of the event. Years later, a visiting paranormal investigator found himself drawn to a large antique mirror in the mansion's grand ballroom. The mirror, imported from Italy and rumored to have been a gift to Valentino, seemed ordinary at first. But as the investigator approached, he noticed that his reflection didn't move in sync with his actions. When he stepped closer, his reflection froze entirely, staring at him with a look of unmistakable fear. Then, behind the frozen image, another figure appeared, a man in a tailored suit with piercing eyes, standing perfectly still. The investigator turned to look behind him, but the room was empty. When he turned back to the mirror, his reflection was gone. Rumors swirl that Falcon Lair's hauntings are more than the restless spirit of Valentino. Some believe the mansion itself is a nexus of supernatural energy, a portal drawing forces from Hollywood's dark past. Others whisper of a pact Valentino may have made in his quest for fame, a bargain never fully repaid. More chilling still are the accounts of those who claim to have dreamt of Falcon Lair without ever setting foot, their dreams of long hallways that stretch endlessly, a locked door that can never be opened, and Valentino standing at the end, his face half hidden in shadow. One thing is certain. The deeper you dig into Falcon Lair's mysteries, the closer you get to something that feels like it was never meant to be uncovered. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. One cold November evening, a visiting historian stayed at Falcon Lair to document its artifacts for a book on Hollywood's golden age. Late into the night, he decided to step out onto the terrace for some air. The city lights twinkled far below, but his focus was drawn to a darker corner of the property, a shadowy figure standing unervingly still by the edge of the garden. The figure didn't move but seemed to watch him, its presence heavy and unnatural. Gathering his courage, the historian called out, thinking it might be a trespasser. The figure tilted its head slightly, as though in recognition, before stepping forward into the moonlight. It was Valentino or something that wore his face. Before the historian could react, the figure raised a gloved hand and gestured toward the house. The man felt an overwhelming urge to turn around, but as he did, he saw the faint outline of another figure standing inside the glass doors behind him. He froze, caught between the specter on the terrace and the silhouette within the house, unsure of where safety lay. When he finally mustered the strength to move, both figures had vanished. But the historian swore he heard footsteps echoing softly in the empty hallways as he retreated to his room. The historian's encounter spurred him to dig deeper into the mansion's history. Days later, he unearthed a little-known fact. Falcon Lair once contained a hidden passageway connecting the library to the wine cellar. Long since sealed, the passage was said to have been built at Valentino's request, though no one knew why. Determined to find it, the historian searched the library meticulously, tapping on walls and examining old photographs of the room. Late one night, he heard a faint knock, 3 deliberate taps, like a signal coming from inside the wall closest to the fireplace. Summoning his nerve, he pressed against the ornate wood paneling. It shifted slightly, revealing a narrow gap, just wide enough for a person to slip through. The air that rushed out was icy and carried the faint scent of old leather and lavender. Before stepping inside, he noticed something peculiar. A faint set of footprints leading into the dark passageway. They appeared fresh, though no one had entered the room. Within the passage, the historian discovered a small room lined with empty shelves. At the center stood a single wooden cabinet, its surface covered in intricate carvings of stars and serpents. The cabinet's door was locked, but faint scratches around the keyhole suggested someone had tried to force it open long ago. On top of the cabinet lay a faded envelope, addressed to NR in Valentino's handwriting. The historian carefully unfolded the letter inside, his hands trembling as he read the cryptic words. "To my dearest, I have found the key, but it is not meant for this world. The stars hold what we cannot. If you see them, do not look too long. They will see you too." The message ended abruptly, as though the writer had been interrupted. That night, the historian dreamed of Falcon Lair, but it wasn't the mansion he knew. In the dream, its walls stretched endlessly, the furniture warped and shadowed. He wandered the hallways until he reached the library, where the secret passage stood wide open. Inside, the cabinet gleamed, its carvings glowing faintly in the dark. As he approached, the sound of breathing filled the room, soft at first, then growing louder, closer, more insistent. He turned, and in the shadows behind him were eyes. Not human eyes, but something else entirely unblinking, glowing faintly like embers, and filled with an unnatural hunger. He woke drenched in sweat, his chest tight as though something had been pressing down on him. Across the room, the library door creaked open on its own, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. The historian didn't sleep for the rest of the night, but in the early hours of dawn, he made a startling discovery. Valentino's letter wasn't written in isolation. Hidden among the mansion's artifacts was another fragment of his correspondence, mentioning a star map said to reveal truths about the other side. The map, if it existed, was never found, but whispers of its existence linger, tied to Falcon Lair and its most mysterious owner. Some say it holds the key to understanding the mansion's supernatural phenomena. Others warn that finding it might awaken something better left undisturbed. After his harrowing night, the historian resolved to leave Falcon Lair. But as he packed, he noticed something new among his belongings: a black velvet glove resting on his suitcase. The fabric was immaculate, as though untouched by time, and the scent of Valentino's signature cologne lingered faintly on it. He hadn't seen it before, and no one else had entered his room. Tentatively, he picked it up, only to feel an intense chill run through his body. For a fleeting moment, it felt as though someone's hand was gripping his, strong and unrelenting. He dropped the glove in shock, but it had vanished before it hit the floor. The historian stared at the empty spot where it had been, his pulse pounding in his ears. That was when he noticed something even more unnerving: the faint imprint of a gloved hand on the fogged-up mirror across the room, accompanied by a single word scrawled in the condensation: "Beware." On the second night, unable to resist the pull of the mansion's mysteries, the historian found himself drawn to the grand clock in the main hall. The towering timepiece had long since stopped functioning, its ornate golden hands forever frozen at 3:15. Or so he thought. As he passed by, the clock began to chime, its low, mournful tone reverberating through the empty house. He checked his watch. It was 2:47. Yet the clock's hands had begun to move, ticking steadily toward midnight. Each chime seemed to echo longer than the last, the sound growing unbearably loud, as if the entire mansion was resonating with its toll. And then, just before the 12th chime, it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, almost tangible, as though the air itself had thickened. Turning to leave, he froze in place. Reflected in the glass face of the clock was a figure standing at the base of the staircase, its features obscured by shadow. But its eyes glowed with a faint, golden light, watching him without blinking. The historian spun around, but the staircase was empty. When he looked back at the clock's reflection, the figure was gone, but the hands of the clock had returned to 3:15, as if nothing had happened. The next morning, he scoured the mansion for answers. Hidden in a drawer of the study desk, he discovered an old blueprint of Falcon Lair, dated 2 years after Valentino's death. Unlike the official plans, this one included several peculiar markings. An X on the library floor, a spiral symbol over the garden, and most puzzling of all, an eye drawn above the master bedroom. He brought the blueprint to the light, hoping to decipher its meaning, but as he studied it, the paper began to fade. The ink bled away as though being swallowed into the parchment, leaving behind nothing but a blank sheet. Panicked, he flipped it over, only to find a message etched faintly on the back. "They are always watching." That evening, as he sat by the fire in the library, he heard a sharp click behind him. One of the tall windows had unlatched itself, swinging open with a groan. Cool night air rushed in, carrying the distant scent of roses. Steeling himself, he approached the window and looked out into the sprawling garden below. At first, it seemed empty, the moonlight casting pale shadows across the hedges. But then he noticed a figure standing at the far edge, half hidden among the trees. It was Valentino again, or the specter that wore his form. This time he wasn't alone. A second figure stood beside him, its outline hazy and indistinct, as though it didn't fully belong to this world. The two figures seemed to notice him watching. Valentino's ghost tilted his head, gesturing toward the house, as if inviting him back inside. The second figure, however, raised a hand not in a gesture of welcome, but in warning. The historian stumbled back, his heart racing. When he dared to look again, the garden was empty. But the window slammed shut behind him with a force that shook the glass, and for a split second, he thought he saw a face pressed against the other side. Later that night, unable to sleep, he reviewed his notes, poring over every detail he'd uncovered about the mansion. Just as his exhaustion began to overtake him, a voice broke the silence. It was soft at first, like a whisper carried on the wind, but soon it grew louder, clearer, until he could make out the words. "You don't belong here." He spun around, but the room was empty. The voice came again, this time from the direction of the blue room. Trembling, he made his way down the corridor, the air growing colder with every step. When he reached the door, it was ajar. The faint glow of moonlight spilled into the hallway, casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. Inside, something waited. The historian hesitated at the threshold of the blue room, every instinct screaming at him to turn back. But curiosity, an insidious, irresistible force, compelled him forward. As he pushed the door open, the air inside was colder than he'd imagined, heavy with the scent of roses and something metallic, like rust. The room was bathed in pale, silvery light that seemed to emanate from nowhere. At its center, the cabinet from the hidden passage stood inexplicably, though he had left it untouched days before. Its carvings glowed faintly, the serpents and stars seeming to shift and writhe as though alive. But it wasn't the cabinet that drew his attention. On the far wall was a large mirror he hadn't noticed before, framed in gilded bronze. As he stepped closer, he realized it wasn't reflecting the room he stood in. Instead, it showed Falcon Lair as it might have been in Valentino's time, vibrant, alive, filled with flickering candlelight and the faint murmur of voices. Figures moved through the reflection, laughing and talking, their forms blurred yet strangely familiar. At the center of the scene stood Valentino himself, his piercing eyes fixed directly on the historian. He raised a hand, motioning for him to come closer. The historian felt an invisible force pulling him toward the mirror. He tried to resist, but his legs moved of their own accord, carrying him to within inches of its surface. Valentino's expression softened, but there was an intensity in his gaze that spoke of desperation. "You've come this far," the ghost murmured, his voice deep and resonant, like a distant echo. "Now you must finish it." The historian's reflection flickered, replaced by an image of himself standing in Valentino's place, surrounded by shadowy figures with glowing eyes. He shook his head, panic setting in. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice trembling. "A choice," Valentino replied. "This house is not just mine. It belongs to them. They gave me everything I desired, but they never left." The historian's mind raced. The cryptic letter, the star map, the glowing eyes in the dark, it all pointed to some terrible truth. Falcon Lair wasn't just haunted. It was a gateway, a tether between this world and something far older, far hungrier. "And now they want you," Valentino said, his expression mournful. "Take my place and they will let me go. Stay, and they will come for you anyway." The historian recoiled, his pulse pounding in his ears. The figures in the mirror began to turn toward him, their faces obscured but their intentions clear. He could feel their malice, their endless hunger, radiating through the glass. "No!" he shouted, tearing himself away from the mirror. He stumbled toward the door, but the room seemed to stretch endlessly, the exit growing farther away with every step. The figures in the mirror began to spill out, their forms oozing like shadows into the room. Valentino's voice called out one final time, filled with regret. "Run, if you can." With a burst of adrenaline, the historian lunged for the door. The moment he crossed the threshold, the air shifted, the cold dissipated, the scent of roses vanished, and the oppressive weight lifted. He didn't stop running until he was outside the mansion, the first rays of dawn breaking over the Hollywood Hills. The historian left Falcon Lair that morning, vowing never to return. He destroyed his notes, unwilling to let anyone else follow in his footsteps. But no matter how far he went, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, that unseen eyes followed him in every reflective surface. Weeks later, Falcon Lair's new owner reported strange occurrences in the house. The clock in the main hall had started chiming again, and a velvet glove was found resting on the grand staircase. As for the historian, his fate remained uncertain. He disappeared months after fleeing the mansion, leaving behind only a cryptic note on his desk. Falcon Lair endures, its mysteries unsolved, its legend growing with each passing year. And those who dare approach it are left with the same question. Is the house haunted by Valentino or by something far darker? Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story. Any coincidences with real events or characters are accidental.